It's been too long. We've waited too long. We've waited way too long for a change in the diversity in school leadership. School leadership across the country is abysmal. It does not reflect modern Britain. It does not reflect the societies that we are leading our schools in. It doesn't reflect the communities that we are in. It's been too long. We've waited. If we don't feel that the people that are working in our schools are good enough to be the leaders in our schools, what we are saying is that the children that are from these communities are also not good enough to be leaders in society tomorrow. And they are, and we are, and we will make a difference.
They hope that the inclusion of Black history in the curriculum will help combat racism.
Black lives have always mattered. We have always been important. We have always meant something. We have always succeeded, regardless. And now is the time. I ain't waiting. I ain't waiting.
Good morning to you all. Just want to thank you immensely for giving up your time today. It's such an important topic that we're discussing today, and I can tell you from my point of view, I didn't get much sleep yesterday or the day before, or the day before that. Excited and also really looking forward to listening to so many different views from so many different people. We've got a wide-ranging panel today, and we are going to be sell out today in terms of the numbers that are joining us, and we will also be streaming on YouTube. Links will be sent out on Twitter for those of you who I've got colleagues that want to join but not able to join. The links will be sent out on our Twitter handle at Chiltern TSA. At Chiltern TSA, we will be putting out a link to the live YouTube streaming, so your colleagues can join. If you are on Twitter, do join the discussion on there. There's lots of people that are actively engaged in conversation already at Chiltern TSA, and use the hashtag LD EduChat just to make it easier for us to find your views and your comments. And as always, this session will be recorded and made available to everybody after today. I am really looking forward to this, and we've put together just a short clip just to give you the context of what we're actually discussing today, and also what's been happening out there on our streets. I think we're just going to hook into the video now.
Learning about Black history isn't mandatory at school. Whether pupils get the opportunity to study topics like migration or the British Empire is totally dependent on the exam board and modules chosen by individual schools, which is why campaigners are demanding a shake-up of the curriculum so all pupils understand what led to the multi-ethnic Britain of today.
It's been too long. We've waited too long. We've waited way too long for a change in the diversity in school leadership. School leadership across the country is abysmal. It does not reflect modern Britain. It does not reflect the societies that we are leading our schools in. It doesn't reflect the communities that we are in. If we don't feel that the people that are working in our schools are good enough to be the leaders in our schools, what we are saying is that the children that are from these communities are also not good enough to be leaders in society tomorrow. And they are, and we are, and we will make a difference.
They hope that the inclusion of Black history in the curriculum will help combat racism.
Black lives have always mattered. We have always been important. We have always meant something. We have always succeeded, regardless. And now is the time. I ain't waiting. I ain't waiting.
Good morning to you all, and welcome to our special session on Black Lives Matter's Anti-Racism, a whole school responsibility. And we're looking at the current challenges that we have that have been highlighted by the various protests and various movements. But we're looking specifically at what does it mean for us as educators, whether it's to do with our curriculum, which is one of our focus points, and also from a strategic point of view in terms of our leadership structures and the leaders that we have. What impact has that had on this, and how do we create that new narrative moving forward in our schools so that we are more inclusive and that we are delivering the message that we want to deliver to the children that will create our next generation of leaders and educators. We've got a wide-ranging panel today. Your engagement, as always, I know a lot of you have been tuning into our CPD #LDEduChat. Your engagement on those sessions is fantastic, and today even more important that your voices are heard. I cannot guarantee that all your questions will be answered, and actually I can probably guarantee that they won't be answered, but we will discuss as much as we can that you have raised. But this isn't a one-stop shop. This is a point that we want to mark, that we need to have these discussions moving forward. So do engage with this, and this session is recorded and will be made available for you to rewatch and share amongst your wider communities in your networks. So do engage with us, do ask us questions, jump onto Twitter at Chiltern TSA, and use the hashtag LDEduChat just to make sure that we get to hear your voice and we can get your views on what we're discussing today. Just going to just one more time for those people that are now joining us. In about 1 minute's time, we'll just rerun that short clip for you, and then we'll jump straight into our live session at 11:30. Thank you again for joining us.
Learning about Black history isn't mandatory at school. Whether pupils get the opportunity to study topics like migration or the British Empire is totally dependent on the exam board and modules chosen by individual schools, which is why campaigners are demanding a shake-up of the curriculum so all pupils understand what led to the multi-ethnic Britain of today.
It's been too long, we've waited too long, we've waited way too long for a change in the diversity in school leadership. School leadership across the country is abysmal. It does not reflect modern Britain. It does not reflect the societies that we are leading our schools in. It doesn't reflect the communities that we are in. If we don't feel that the people that are working in our schools are good enough to be the leaders in our schools, what we are saying is that the children that are from these communities are also not good enough to be leaders in society tomorrow. And they are, and we are, and we will make a difference.
They hope that the inclusion of Black history in the curriculum will help combat racism.
Black lives have always mattered. We have always been important. We have always meant something. We have always succeeded, regardless. And now is the time. I ain't waiting. I ain't waiting.
Good morning. Welcome to this special edition of hashtag LDEduChat. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of you that have joined in today. We are looking at the numbers there. We are completely at capacity. If you've got any colleagues that do want to join in terms of watch what's happening, we are streaming this live onto YouTube, and the links will be shared on our Twitter handles at Shilton TSA and various others. So do have a look on there and share that with your colleagues if they are having problems joining in. It literally will be a case of 1 in, 1 out at the moment, and we are at capacity. So immense thank you for your support in this. Today we have an amazing panel of people with us. Sufyan Sadiq, who will be doing the brief intro video leading into our main presentation, will thank the majority of us, but we have got some that we managed to get on board at the last minute. And I just want to reach out to Alana Gay, who is joining us today, and also Alison Krell will be joining us hopefully at some point, as well as Carl Bell. and I think Amjad Ali will be trying to join us as well. So we've got a huge panel looking at two main key areas, one on curriculum and the second on leadership within our schools, all with reference to how do we create a better narrative moving forward and what changes do we actually need to make. For those of you that are familiar with us, you'll know the drill. We have a Q&A tab at the bottom, and do engage with us. Your engagement today, more so than ever, will be absolutely crucial. More voices, many voices are what make a chorus, and a chorus is what we need in terms of all singing what we want in terms of moving forward, and we want to hear your views on the Q&A. The panel will be looking at the Q&A, discussing them in the live Q&A part, as well as on the by typing as well. This session is recorded, as I said to you, and will be made available after today, as well as it being live streamed onto YouTube as well. If there is a question that you do like on the Q&A, can you just hit the thumbs up rather than end up with 20 questions that are almost identical? It'd be really good that we know actually what you want to have answered, and therefore we want to make sure that those questions get prioritized towards the top. Without further ado, I think we need to jump straight into our pre-recorded part, which is various leaders from our communities and our schools and other stakeholders that are giving their view on why today and why this issue and why we need to change. So without further ado, we're going to jump straight into our video.
Thank you for joining us today for our next leadership development session. Thanks to our panellists and Sarah Owen in particular, who'll be kindly hosting this session. As an organisation, it's really important that we reflect on our approach and get us all thinking. And today's session is to do that, to start the discussions and get us heading in all the right direction. So I'm now going to hand over to Sufyan Sadiq, who'll give you a bit more detail about today's session.
Black Lives Matter and anti-racism, a whole school responsibility. I'm so pleased today that you could join us for this session. Thank you to everyone that's made it possible for us to put this on at such short notice. And thank you to you all for taking the time out to sit in and listen to this discussion and hopefully take something away that will lead to action, that will lead to improvement. Why are we hosting this discussion? Why are we hosting this session? We have a platform, Chiltern Teaching School Alliance, have the LD EduChat series, which has had over 60,000 bookings in the last few weeks. We're incredibly proud of that, but that comes with responsibility. And seeing some of the challenges unfold globally, we knew that we cannot sit back and we have to do something about this. We have to use our platform for a positive change. We're not going to be able to present to you the entire solution. We're not going to claim that this CPD session is somehow the only thing that you need to access to get the answers that you need to make a difference. But what we do want to do is ensure that everyone out there within our sector understands that Black Lives Matter is an important discussion for us at every level. As educators and the leaders in thinking and thought, in the way we inspire young people, for us, it's more important than we can ever really imagine. What we have seen unfold globally and what we have heard from people's accounts when people are coming forward is that people do not feel valued. Lives are not valued. And that's such a fundamental thing for us to consider. Today, we are incredibly honored that we have a panel discussion taking place hosted by Sarah Owen, MP for Luton. We also have Gwyneth Gibson, head teacher, ex-HMI, also making a video contribution and also a panelist. Alongside Gwyneth, we will have a video for Anae Justin. I was so pleased to be able to speak to Anae and ask her to do this video because it's important that we include the voices of young people and how young people feel about this issue, because they are the people that we serve and they are the reason why we do this great work as educators. We also, from within this session, have Hannah Tyerman from the Chartered College of Teaching. We have Lavinia from Black Curriculum, Sid Sloan, Raza, Pran Patel, Narayan, Rohana Faisal, Ann Palmer, Penny Raybiger, Stephen Chamberlain, and Diana Osaji. to mention some of the names that will be joining us for this amazing discussion today. What do I want you to all take away from this? I want you all to take a moment to reflect on what is discussed today. Listen to some of our powerful contributors that have been active in this discussion, active in this issue, in ensuring that equality exists in reality. We've got the best mix of thoughts and views to really hear from them about what they think, from senior leadership level, teacher level to governors. We want a healthy discussion. Your questions are incredibly important. Your contributions are important. Following us on Twitter, checking out the YouTube page later on. We want you to engage with this material. Most importantly, we want you to take this away and form a discussion in your school. Have a CPD session based on this in your school about what can we do. I think what we have learned over the last few weeks, that sometimes some of our efforts in schools simply do not go far enough to drive and bring about the change that we so desperately need. And therefore, we need to do more. Take the opportunity to reflect on today's session and give us your feedback. Thank you very much once again for joining us. I'll now pass you on to Gwyneth Gibson for her keynote for this session. Thank you very much.
It's an honour and a privilege to be here. And I'm very mindful that I'm here and what I'm speaking about and what the ramifications are of, one, me speaking and what does my voice represent. So we're here today to talk about Black Lives Matter in education. Now, we're not here to talk about the organisation, so I'm going to rephrase that to Black Lives Mattering. And that's what we need to be discussing. We need to discuss why it is in 2020 I make up a significant minority of persons of colour, and as a black woman head teacher, I'm a significant minority. That is shameful. And that's a conversation that we need to have. We also need to have a conversation around the actual curriculum and the body of the curriculum and how it gives me a voice and how it makes me be seen. Now, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, I personally have a problem with the word black. I think it's a lazy definition. And the reason why I feel it's a lazy definition of me and those of us who are defined as such is because its construction only exists in a Western idea about who I am. That word black negates my rich cultural history, heritage, and all the things that characterize me as an individual. What it does is it groups us. And the problem you have when you group people is that you discriminate. So if black it's an emotive word. People have an emotional response to the word black. And they blame it, or they use it, they define it based on their perceptions or their experiences. Now, if we look at education, and we look at the curriculum, and we look at leaders, one could quite strongly argue education has had very little experience of black. We could argue that, because the evidence says that. But what happens is people make judgments about black based on their emotive understanding of black. And for some reason, that definition seems to be around aggression, anger, violence, negativity. It's never really seen in a positive. So if you're judging black people as one group, you are going to, and as often is, judged by the lowest common denominator of that group. And that's a problem. So I've said already, it is shameful that here I am as a black woman, significantly underrepresented in my field. And I have to ask questions of why that is. Now, for me, as a black leader, I had to learn how to have uncomfortable conversations. For instance, preparing for this, I had to have an uncomfortable conversation with myself. Because often, when a black leader, the few of us that there are, speaks out, it's taken as the voice of all black people, because we all think as one. And that is not the case. I'm sitting here in front of you as an individual who's had a black experience in England in my upbringing. And I've had to learn, and that's not me bowing, because I can't bow. It's not about bowing, it's about being able to get over the discomfort of conversations like this and have them. Now I'm just going to address white leaders. You need to have those uncomfortable conversations. You need to have those uncomfortable conversations with yourself. You need to ask yourself, why is it that I don't have black leaders on my senior leadership team? Why is it that I'm okay to teach a curriculum that only recognises black people in October for 1 month, and even that I do badly? And when I do that, why is it that I talk about civil rights leaders from the USA? Why am I not aware of the black history of the students that I'm teaching and the leaders, the staff that I lead? That's an uncomfortable conversation, but one that needs to happen. Because if that doesn't happen with the persons in the positions of power, this is a futile debate. And actually, it's just a tag along to a fashionable discussion at the moment. We're just servicing, we're just quieting people down for a little bit. We'll do something, we'll do these little grassroots events, and then we're done and we move on. That's not it. This is a time for change. And if change doesn't happen now, it will never happen. And so white leaders, you need to ask yourself this. You need to ask yourself, why is it that I have not seen the talent in those black leaders in school? Why am I happy to have that black leader as head of department, or better still, pastorally, because that's what we're good at? Why is it that I only see them in so far as that? Why have I not given opportunity or rise to that talent? What is the part that I'm playing? If you can tell me that you just happen to have a lot of black teachers who lack talent and capability, then fine. But if you can't answer that question concisely, convincingly, honestly and robustly, then you have to ask yourself some questions, and it's uncomfortable. Because when we recognise that we engage in those stereotypes, it's uncomfortable. It's difficult, but we have to have them. You have to move past that discomfort. You know, currently we're having these debates about monuments, and people are talking about the monuments, we shouldn't take them down. But people only now realise in the history of what those monuments represent. And I wonder why that is. And I think that's because when we talk about Black Lives Matters, we talk about people in America, and everyone says, well, in England that couldn't happen. I'd argue it doesn't happen because the police aren't armed. I'd argue that's relative. But the fact remains is that it doesn't happen here, it's in America. It's as if England were not major players in the slave trade. As if in England or in Europe generally, the whole economy wasn't built on slavery. That's uncomfortable for some people to learn. They didn't realise that. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that they didn't realise that? Why is that history not taught? Because it's an uncomfortable history. But if we're going to make it history and not present, because in the attempt to hide that history of rape, pillaging, brutality served against black people, we've had to create a different history. And in creating a different history, you still oppress the people that you don't want to confront that brutal things were done to. And that's what we need to discuss. And that's the conversation that needs to happen. And it's complex, and it's difficult, and it's uncomfortable. But if we don't have them, we can't move forward. It'll always be the present. And we'll always be frustrated. And we'll always treat black people as a group based on one common denominator. So for instance, if you're a black girl and you are loud, because some children are loud, but if you're a black girl who's loud and you're a black girl who's passionate and who stands up for themselves, you're aggressive. You need to calm down. That's what you need to do. And I know there's many black women right now nodding and going, oh, I've been there. So that is the situation that we're in. And until we have those conversations, we'll never be seen. We don't exist in the curriculum. We're faceless. I have the most diverse senior leadership team that I've ever seen. And I recognise talent in people. And there are people on my team who, female and non-whites on my team, who have all thanked me for giving them an opportunity. And I tell them, this is not about an opportunity. This is not about me doing you a favour. This is about me seeing your talent. And the reason why that's really important, I have seen white senior leaders who are not very strong, given an opportunity. Oh, it's all right, we can sort that out, we can develop them. For us black leaders, we have to be the finished article you can get on the leadership journey. We have to be flawless. We can't be learning. We can't be actually, do you know what, with a little bit of training and development, that talent is there. We have to be the finished article, and the pressure is enormous. I can tell you as a black head teacher, coming into this profession, coming into a town that I don't know, with no connection, I have never, ever faced the attack that I have as a head teacher. Now, I can hear loads of people go, well, we're all attacked as head teachers, because what happens when you talk about race, especially about black issues, and that's another uncomfortable conversation people need to have. When you start to talk about race and you talk about black issues, as soon as you see anything that the person who feels uncomfortable can relate to, well, it's all of us. It's all of us suffer that. But right now, we're talking about Black lives mattering. And so we're focusing on the black experience. And that's all we should be talking about right now in this conversation. As a black leader, the very first criticism of me was that I only employed black people. What does that tell you? I'm just going to leave that one out there. I only employ black people. I don't know how I only employ black people in an industry where we're hugely underrepresented, but apparently I do. So your talents are not seen for what they are, it's seen from a black perspective. You're doing a favour for somebody because they're black. Favours have been done all the time in education, and I said to you, I don't do favours. The reason why I tell my leaders and my team that I don't do favours is because if I tell you I've done you a favour, you are never going to recognise within yourself your talent, your greatness, your ability to be a leader. I would be doing you a disservice if I did you a favour. I don't need to do you a favour because you're talented. We have to look at the curriculum. We have to question how we are making an equality of opportunity. The onus and the responsibility is on leaders in schools, and it's on the decision makers of the curriculum to say this is not right. We are making an ignorant nation of people because they don't know their history. We are disenfranchising a whole group of people who sometimes the fight is tiring. Sometimes I just want to say, do you know what? This is not on. I'm fed up. Sometimes the rage that Bell Hooks talks about, I don't want to kill it. Sometimes I just want to be upset, but I can't. I have to consistently think about what I represent. And until we're in a position where we are represented on a wider scale, so I can just be, I will have to keep suppressing certain things. But what I won't suppress, and what I will not be quiet about, is that it's well overdue. And people need to ask themselves those difficult questions. They need to ask themselves, why do I not study Diane Abbott, Trevor Phillips, Bernie Grant? Why do I not look at those people? Why do I not know their history and how their history impacted on the fabric of British culture? Why don't I know the history of The Voice newspaper, radio stations, Black British film? Why do I not study these things in school? Because it's uncomfortable. So there we are. This is only the start. It cannot be the end result. We have to have those conversations, and all of us have to be prepared to hear things that we don't want to hear or we're uncomfortable about. This is a rich debate. It's only the start. Remember, black isn't a fashion. I'm not fashion. You know, every time there's a black issue that comes up, it's fashionable to jump on it, and then we just move on to the next fashion. I'm not fashion, and I'm not going anywhere.
Hello everyone, I'm Hannah Tyman and I am Head of Online Learning and Community at the Chartered College of Teaching. I'm also on the steering group for the BLM Network. I recently embarked on a journey to learn more about curriculum. This has included vision and purpose, rigour and challenge, and moving from intent to implementation. This journey has also included a necessary look at how the curriculum can be decolonised. I've broken this presentation into 3 steps that can be taken by any educator seeking to embark on a similar journey, not in order to persuade you to take the journey, but in the hope that you're already eagerly anticipating it. These steps are learn, reflect and act. Starting with learning was important on my journey for 2 reasons. 1, it's where I start most of my journeys. When I'm lost in the shallow waters of my existing knowledge and experience, I go to others. Secondly, I needed to extract myself from my own perspectives, contexts and experiences and engage with narratives that weren't my own. I know my own perspectives. They're familiar to me, they're comforting, but they don't necessarily help me to appreciate someone else's experience and existence. At a recent online seminar, educator and coach Angela Brown shared that it was important we begin with learning because it allows us to listen not for what's true for you, but true for others. This can feel challenging, it can feel uncomfortable. You will need to resist your own dominant and familiar narratives on this stage of your journey and beyond. Over on the BayMed Network website, we've gathered all kinds of content to support your learning journey, including articles, blogs, books, podcasts, and videos. I'm ordinarily a reading person, but some of the narratives felt much more powerful when they could be listened to rather than red. I recently gathered a reading list for Chartered College of Teaching members that has been made open access and contains many of the things that have contributed to my learning journey about anti-racist education generally, as well as decolonising the curriculum more specifically. The learning stage of your journey is certainly a continuous one, but it may reach the point where you'd like to move into the more formal reflect stage. There are many risks to not reflecting deeply about curriculum, or indeed about teaching in general, either as an individual or with your colleagues. In the context of decolonising the curriculum, this deep reflection is vital. If we stop at learning and raising our own awareness, we fall short of making any meaningful impact on our pupils. These are questions it may be useful to ask with colleagues on a regular basis. And these questions aren't the only questions, but they might be a useful starting point and can move us beyond bias. So what and who are we teaching our pupils about? Why? Are there other figures we could and should be including? How should this knowledge be introduced so as to be of equal importance to other dominant knowledges that usually occupy the canon as the only form of legitimate knowledge? The reading that you've engaged with during the learning stage of your journey may act as a stimulus for these conversations so that you and colleagues can go on a learning journey together. This guidance on conducting reading groups from the Chartered College of Teaching may be helpful. Progressing next to action is perhaps the most important step of all, but shouldn't be reached too quickly ahead of the other two stages of your journey. This set of questions were included as part of a case study written for the Chartered College of Teaching. Once you've identified parts of the curriculum you'd like to review, either in terms of what is taught, who is taught, or how it is taught, then you can move to act. Pupil voice will be important to inform your work, and you'll likely need to return to further learning and reflection throughout. This reading list contains a few examples of how teachers have decolonised their curriculum and may provide useful inspiration for your own actions.
Hello, I'm Anae Justin. For me, identity has always been a difficult challenge. Coming from a mixed race family, I've always felt the need to pick a side when that should not be the case at all. However, my experiences in many aspects of life have given me clarity that I am in fact a young Black woman. Police brutality is not the only form of inequality that Black people all over the world face, and this issue goes much deeper than George Floyd. We need to look into many aspects of society that affect not only young Black people in a negative way, but all Black people. As someone who is academically able, one of my aspirations was to get into a Russell Group university. And I did manage to get 5 offers at the 5 Russell Group unis that I applied for. Nonetheless, things like academic achievement, graduate prospects, and research quality were not the only things that I had to take into consideration, as well as many other Black people in my position as well, when choosing our firm choice unis. I researched deeply into these universities, trying to get an idea of what life is like for Black people at these unis. I do not want to attend a university where I don't see people like me, not only because I don't want to feel like the odd one out, but also because I don't want to feel like everyone there thinks I'm not good enough or that I'm inferior, not only academically, but socially as well. And this is the hard truth that Black people face when making literal life-changing decisions. A lot of young Black people are hesitant to even apply to these unis based on where they stand in situations of racial inequality and how they deal with pre-existing situations of racism. Many of these being prestigious universities that we as Black people know we're good enough to get into and excel in. The importance of inclusivity starts in education. In school, there were not many Black teachers. Therefore, there were not many teachers who understood the challenges of being a Black student. I did not learn about many successful Black people. I did not see many textbooks, including pictures or information on Black people who changed the world. During Black History Month, we'd spend a few lessons learning about those token Black figures in society. So Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. My school would have a day of the week where they'd cook Caribbean food and we'd have to eat the canteen's version of jerk chicken. And then for the other 11 months of the year, we'd go back to learning about the whitewash history, as people call it. So kings and queens, Albert Einstein, Winston Churchill, Neil Bohr, and people like that. We need to learn about more Black people who made a change, and we need to know about our history because we do not learn enough, sadly. I see myself lucky enough to have a strong enough mind to still believe in myself and my capabilities, regardless of me not seeing many people in the industry that I'm working towards who look like me, of my skin colour, who have hair like me. However, not all young people are like this, and many will take the idea that we live in a white man's world and use it as an inhibitor their academic potential. So in conclusion, we as a society need to look into reforming these very systems that were designed to see BAME people fail, and we need to raise a generation of aspirational people who will not be afraid to chase their dreams. And maybe then we will start to see more Black CEOs, doctors, scientists, lawyers, teachers and head teachers, and just more Black people in power.
Well, I don't think I really need to add anything more to that before we join our panels. So what I'd like to do, without further ado, is welcome Sarah Owen MP to our E-Stage, who will be chairing the two panel discussions that are happening. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. And I think a massive thank you to the Chiltern team for putting on this webinar and this initiative. It's fantastic that you've got over 1,000 people now online. But I think, as Gwyneth said, it's really important now that Black Lives Matter isn't a moment, it is the beginning of something. And we all have a responsibility to play our part in that, particularly for the future. And I think in terms of the tools, barriers, and removing the systemic racism that we see in this country, it's not just in the US, we see it in this country, in every institution, in every organisation, and including education. We need to be able to rid our institutions of the systemic racism that is causing that barrier.
Absolutely. And joining you today, obviously, we've got a wide-ranging panel from so voices from lots of different perspectives, and I want this to be a lively, engaging debate. The first panel that we're going to have. So if everybody that's on the panel can actually turn their cameras on for me, just so that we can see. You can leave your mics on mute until we're actually speaking, if that's okay. So the first part we're going to be looking at is obviously curriculum, and I am literally going to hand this over to you, Sarah, if that's okay. You've seen the questions that have come up. You know about the issue. We've talked about this. So I'm going to leave it with you, and let's just see where this goes.
I think, as we saw in the video, it's what we teach and how we teach it that's so important for our young people. And couple of the questions that have come up already on the question and answer chat, and I'd encourage everybody to put their questions on there as soon as possible so we can get through to them, is around what documents, sites, particularly around British history, have we got for diversifying the curriculum? I know Hannah has already touched on it, but also how do we teach that to our children, and who should be making the changes at a higher level in terms of the curriculum we teach? And I think, shall I go to Lavinia first?
Have we got Lavinia on at the moment?
No, I think we need to move on.
No, that's fine. Okay. Does anybody want to jump in with that? As I said, we'll take that as it goes. Just hands up. Yeah, Alana.
So in terms of looking at curriculum resources that you can immediately sort of implement inside of your schools, I would say that start with the Runnymede resources. So the Runnymede and the Historical Association have made a point of doing migration story. And with their work, it really emphasizes the historical context that has brought all of these different types of, all of these different migrants to the UK and the contribution that they've made. They also study in depth about the UK or Britain's presence in those countries, and that gives a far more balanced view than we get within our current curriculum. Secondly, I'd recommend the Center for Literacy in Primary Education and their study on diverse stories and looking at the books that we're using inside the curriculum, so that it's not just books that give caricatures of Black people or BAME people and entities, but they give a really solid review of those books that contribute cultural understanding and to social understanding of different ethnic groups. So I think I'll hand over to Sheila next because she had a hand up.
Hi, good morning, everybody. What I'd like to say is that the key, in terms of secondary education, the Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 national curriculum already gives the framework for teaching Black history. If you look at the document, the guidance that's out there, it says that we should teach about antiquity and so on and so forth. There is lots of opportunity to go wider than the current history which is being taught in our schools. One of the things that I find most striking is that if you're a secondary school student, the first time you come across somebody who looks like yourself is of an image of an enslaved man and the boat in which we were brought across to Europe, to the Americas and to the Caribbean. That's the first thing that you see when you pick a history book up. Now, purely from the perspective of teaching, we know that in order to teach children, you need to engage them. They need to feel that they have some positive part in that story that you're relaying. Otherwise, you're not going to engage with that. I think that one of the things that needs to be addressed initially is what is actually in those test books and what is taught. And I think that there is an opportunity at the moment to work with many of the Black historians which are out there. I think of Robin Walker. I think of Paul M.A. Wilson. There are a number of people out there who could help us to shape that discussion and look at what it is that we begin to teach in our schools.
Thank you, Sheila and Alana. I think Lavinia's with us now as well. Lavinia?
Hi, yeah, I'm here. Let me turn on my camera. Hi, everyone. So, yeah, we've been working for the past year to basically embed Black history into the national curriculum. Obviously, our campaign at the moment, it has taken off, and our aim is to speak with Gavin Williamson about getting Black history into the national curriculum. So one of the things that we're actually working on at the moment is collating a list of examples that will shortly be going out to academics, historians, teachers, about suggestions that we can use to actually embed into the national curriculum, because it's not just going to be from our syllabus. So yeah, a lot of our work is with young people in schools and also out of schools, but I think it's crucial at such a time as this that we have a policy that is actually able to reverberate into society so that everybody knows the importance of Black history. I think recently there's been a lot of comments as to like why Black history specifically. I think it's so key that we're able to focus specifically on Black British history, because young people are just not aware of Britain. They're not aware of the kind of experiences that have shaped Britain, specifically through a Black lens. And for me, it's really important that we're able to push this, particularly with the rise in awareness around Black Lives Matter over the last 3 weeks. So yeah, we want to continue doing this work, but I think it's really important that we are doing this together, and we have the support of everyone who's been pushing this for decades, because whilst our campaign has got the momentum, it's not just us. Like, we're just a couple of young people who have been able to kind of raise more awareness about it, but I think it's really key that we have the support of others who've been doing this work.
Lavinia, I just wanted to ask a quick question around the focus of your work, not just being about history, but about across the curriculum.
Yeah, so the approach that we take through our curriculum, it's about being able to provide a thematic kind of view on history. So we have different topics that are to do with migration, land and the environment. So not traditional kind of like history lessons like that are periodic, but rather taking a more thematic view. So we have examples from 1700 on the curriculum, but also more current day examples such as Grenfell and Windrush, and these are topics that you're able to fit within citizenship, PSHE. We have examples in our art history module that have been used in music classes as well. So I think it's about being able to kind of have a broader view that yes, the history curriculum needs to be changed, yes, but there are other ways that Black history can be embedded throughout other subjects. So it's not just falling on history teachers to make this change, and other teachers are alleviated of that burden. I think it's really key that different narratives, more complex and fluid narratives, are part of the teachings throughout the curriculum.
Thank you so much, Lavinia. One of the questions touched on what the video had raised as a point of the terms and the language that we use around Black and BAME people as problematic. I was just wondering if any of the other panel members would be able to talk a bit more about that and how we overcome that in a teaching environment. I can't see anybody's hands up.
I think Narayan has.
Fine, okay.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's amazing to be part of this discussion. I think you've touched on a really important point, Sarah, about language and how much it matters. One phrase that gets thrown around education quite a lot is the phrase cultural capital. And it's often used when teachers say, our students lack cultural capital. They don't. They have culture. It's just not the culture that you expect them to have. That phrase itself denigrates other cultures. So that phrase has now come into the fore. It's been misunderstood completely initially. It's come into the fore, and it's been used to shape some of the curriculum decisions that have impacted our young people. So we have to understand the importance of our words on our students, because when we use phrases like cultural capital, we are ignoring the history, the literature, the art, which predates some of the history that is taught in our schools. We are invalidating some of their identity, and we're disempowering them. So I truly believe that things like those phrases do more harm than actual good. And the phrase BAME is also quite deceptive. We heard the Prime Minister speak about that recently in reference to his cabinet. Yes, he did have BAME representation, but he had Asian representation. It was exclusive to one part of that umbrella phrase. So it can be misleading, and it can really allow people to get off the hook when we're talking about things like diversity, because it makes it quite exclusive. So I think as educators, we have to be very mindful of how we use language. There is so much euphemism. I'm an English teacher myself. There's so much euphemism about certain phrases when we talk in communities that are diverse, that have negative connotations.
Thank you. No, absolutely spot on. I see Sid with his hand up.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to Arv and all the guys at Chiltern for organising this fantastic chat. And thank you to the contributors so far. I don't come from within education. A lot of you may know me from a children's television channel, but I've switched up and I've gone into doing what I know, doing what I do, which is working with children, empowering them to become independent thinkers and to become healthy physically and mentally. And what I've experienced, and I totally agree, I have to put in a disclaimer, by the way, Gwen Gibson is my sister, and we often have these conversations about that very thing. And I really do not like, I've not liked for a very long time. I've written to the BBC and said to them, why do you use this term Black? What does it actually mean? How are you describing someone like me when you place a colour? You're destroying my identity. You're taking away any chance that I have to be a personality, to have character, to have flair. When I was 12 years of age, I grew up in the 70s, and racism was rife in those days. It was in your face, and there was no escaping it. And I had this epiphany, this moment of realization that how about if I just say Black is beautiful? And I had a t-shirt printed with that term, Black is beautiful. And it created so many positive discussions and reactions. It really boosted me. It gave me a lot of confidence to own that term. Of course, today, I recognize that in a way, it over boosted me and gave me more confidence than I had in terms of my own real abilities to be able to learn about a subject matter from within rather than from without. And so I took on the expressions that were outwardly directed towards me, and I actually I inwardly reflected them. And my Black is Beautiful was a reaction, but actually I needed to do more than that. I needed to have better discussions with people about what it really meant. And you know, when it comes to working with children, I often feel that the best way to help them, to lead them, is to get them to lead the discussion. So it's always about opening up the conversation and giving them an opportunity to tell me what they think. Let me know where they want it to go, because I'm more interested in creating through them and with them and having them influence other people. So, you know, what I do, although I'm not in school as a teacher or a leader, what I do is I try to involve the whole community, the school community, as well as the outside community, but most importantly, involve the community of the kids. Get them to have a voice, let them speak, let them tell us what it thinks. Let them tell us what they think and how it needs to go.
Thank you, Sid. We've had a question, I think, that kind of follows on from that, and some of the points that Narian was making around what we do and how we teach in slightly less diverse areas, and how this fits. A question from Ian has said how this fits with other minority ethnic groups in terms of teaching Black history and the Black Lives Matter movement. Is there anybody that wants to pick up on that point and those questions? Is Hannah there at all?
No. Oh, Alana wants to jump back. Oh, sorry, Sheila. And Sheila and Alana. So go to Sheila first.
I think Alana was before me.
Oh, okay.
Alana.
Thank you, Sheila. I think from one perspective, it's a case that you might start with Black, but then you move on to everyone else. So we're not saying that exclusively introduce Black history or Black experiences. It's about decolonizing and diversifying your curriculum as a whole and looking at all of the experiences that everyone is having that make up this community that we have in the United Kingdom. So it's not just about one to the exclusion of the other, nor is it about where do I find the time, because a really skilled teacher will be able to integrate those different arguments, those different perspectives, and teach our children how to think through all of those varied perspectives that they're going to get within the curriculum. So it's not about a singularity or anything similar. You can look at the contribution that we have from our supplementary schools in the manner that they teach, and they're able to encompass an academic curriculum that works alongside learning a lot about different cultures, and that's enriched our education landscape. And my final point would be, it is even more important for areas that have low diversity or much less diversity in their communities, for them to have a diverse curriculum, because we are not preparing children to remain within one stagnant area. We're preparing them for a global community. And when they go out there, they must not be ignorant of the rich history that every single community has. Sheila, all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Agree with what you've said. Sarah, you mentioned that, I think the questioner, the question that you were referring to mentioned about something about other groups. And other groups, all groups are important. But let's remember why we are at this point, at this moment in time. It's because of what happened to George Floyd and all of those things that have happened in the United States that have kicked this thing off. And that is about the unique experience of people like myself. There isn't another experience like ours. So yes, it is important to talk about others, but let's not immediately jump into the fact of, discussing the need to, be diverse and all of these things. Yes, it's important to be diverse, but let's tackle the matter at hand. It's important to talk about our history. And a second point I'd like to make on that, I think one of the panelists mentioned this earlier, I think it might have been you, Sid, who mentioned this, that our history did not begin with colonialism and what happened in slavery. That was a small blip in the history of, in world history. It was a very small blip. Interestingly, Paul Wilson does a Black history, an African timeline, and it shows you the history of the world and how this was a small thing that happened. There is a wealth of history to study that happened before that. And within the existing framework of Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 curriculum, there is the scope to deliver that. I think that there are lots of groups who are doing things on this topic of Black history. There needs to be a coming together, because it's important that we bring those forces together and tackle this question. I'm not at this stage prepared to have somebody speak on my behalf without me feeling that that person represents my view.
Absolutely, and that was one of the arguments that came up in Parliament recently, where we saw Preeti Patel say that she has experienced racism, and it was used to shut down my colleague Florence from asking what this government was doing to tackle systemic racism. And we may have some shared experiences, but we will never know. We may be able to understand, we may be able to empathize, but right now, this is the issue. And although I can see some of the questions are a lot broader that are in the Q&A, I'd encourage some more questions to come through as well. Thank you. One of the questions is about how, not just how we teach within the current curriculum, it's how we actually change the national curriculum. So I was wondering if anybody was prepared to speak about that. I have one very easy way, but I will keep that apolitical.
We've got Amjad Ali, who's got his hand up.
Yeah.
So I think, morning everyone, and thank you for putting on this event. I just wanted to draw references, being an Asian male and looking at this from a perspective of Black Lives Matter. I've had to dig deep in my own personal reflective journey on, I've always been against oppression, always been against systemic racism, but I've always looked at it from an angle of myself being an Asian male. So thinking about the BAME characteristic, Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, I've always come at it with, how does this affect me? How does this affect my lived experience? And so doing that, I wrote recently about the idea of, we look at oppression through the oppression that we might have faced. And Preeti Patel's example of, well, I haven't faced any oppression, means therefore that there could be an argument for her that there isn't any oppression. What I worry about, especially with people that might not have faced any personal oppression per se, is that the association with Black people always comes down to the most simplistic terms that they have drawn references from, which is slavery. And they will say, well, we need to teach about slavery and we need to teach about the plight of Black people in those areas. Absolutely. I'm not saying we go away with, or we let away with any of those things. But what I fear is, and especially in the curriculum, and I would implore everyone to think about this in greater detail, is let's not just teach about the oppression, let's teach about the value and the skills and the amounts of insight that they have brought. For example, when we looked at this whole idea of quarantine, we looked at the professor, the Islamic scholar that actually come up with the whole idea of quarantine being a 40-day system. But if you look at our English textbooks per se, it will have derived from an Italian scholar, whereas actually it comes from way before that. So we need to think of not just teaching history of oppression, but teaching history of identity and history of what we bought. Now, I'm an old school citizenship teacher. When we did British values, we actually looked at the deeper root of British values. We looked at etymology of words. We looked at the historical association of items that we are so ingrained with and so a part and parcel of. I mean, that used to happen a long time ago, but then I don't know if it's been squeezed out. But my argument would just simply be, when reviewing your curriculum, do not just think about the history of oppression, think about what value has been bought by Black people as well.
Thank you, Amjad. That really reflects one of the points that's been raised in the question and answer section, around English texts for GCSE being predominantly white dead men, with what they see as tokenistic nods to different texts from different cultures in poetry. And I was just wondering if we wanted to widen it out to how we see this change, not just in history, but we see it in each of the subjects that we teach. Is there anybody that wants to pick that up?
Narayan has got his hand up at the moment.
Okay, Narayan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just firstly, from a literature point of view, it's about telling stories in a positive way, finding texts that represent people in a fair and positive way. And just sort of touching on Amjad's point about balance, I think balance is hugely important. It has taken 100 years since the First World War for us to start recognizing the contributions of people from around the world in that particular conflict. 100 years. And there was a comment on Saturday at one of the occupations of Parliament Square. I won't call it a protest because it wasn't a protest, where one of the far right members said that Churchill defeated Hitler. So there's been a fundamental miseducation as well of what is being taught. So we can't ignore what's been taught because it's part of this country, but there must be balance when those things are taught. So when we talk about Shakespeare and we talk about Othello, for example, we need to talk about the cultural exchange that occurred at that point. It isn't just binary. There are value to be had in so many different places. So my point would be, when you teach literature in my subject, it is about finding positive representation, and it's about finding places where you can have a balanced conversation. Things aren't binary, they are nuanced.
Is there anybody else that wants to pick up on that point at all? Carl?
Thank you. Yeah, just sort of adding on to that, I think it also happens lower down for teachers, and I think it happens in the teacher training. I think part of teachers training should be about teaching a diverse, multicultural Britain and teaching people from a diverse ethnic backgrounds, and making sure that they're equipped to do that, and making sure that resources are readily available for teachers so that they can have them and access them in their lessons. I also think that there should be a bigger and higher representation of Black leaders in leadership positions and in head teacher positions, because as we know, it is those people who make those changes in curriculums. And I think if we are increasing the number of Black people who are head teachers and leaders in school, then the curriculum changes will happen, and then children will leave school with better educated to make decisions about the wider world.
Definitely. And on that point, Carl, one of the questions is about how we prepare our students to deal with racism, both covert and overt. So I just wondered whether anybody had any points on that. Sid?
You forced me to speak there, Sarah.
I could see you were ready to
Since
speak.
we rub in my hands, it's such a juicy subject, isn't it? How do we get kids to talk about race and racism? How do we get them to understand it, to see it? I had a very similar. I had this conversation with an 8-year-old girl who's never experienced it. Lives in Dorset, which, for those who don't know, is a very rural part of the country. Not a main city, not even a town really, that she lives in Dorset. And she got very upset when I told her about my personal experiences. And it upset me that she got upset to hear them. It never upset me to relive them, but it shocked me to recognize that A, she hadn't experienced it, B, that it upset her, C, that actually it still goes on. That I've spoken to children who have experienced the same thing that I have experienced, which was 40 years ago. And I got more upset about that than anything else. So I think it's about storytelling. We all love a story. We've all got a story. We all have our own personal stories. So let's tell our stories. Let's not be afraid to be creative about telling those stories. Let's open up the doors, open up the windows, let some new air in. I know that schools can be quite restrictive in terms of what you're trying to deliver with the curriculum. But whenever I go in there, it's always about opening it up, letting people speak, let them share their experiences, find different ways of creatively tapping into that outlet, because we all have the ability to be creative. You know, when I take, just changing the subject slightly because it's a good example. I remember taking a group of kids from an inner city area to an outdoor space where there was an apple tree, and there was a child sitting there, jaw dropped, looking at an apple growing on the tree because he didn't know that apples grew on trees. And it's changing the experience in the environment, taking them somewhere else, giving them another way of looking at a subject matter. So saying, okay, what do you recognize is different about this? And not necessarily talking directly about race, but just showing different things that appeal in different ways and getting them to understand how they feel about it, getting them to discuss it, talk about it, share about it. I think it's just opening up those discussions. And once again, recognizing that don't be afraid to mention the subject, but also don't be afraid to not mention it. Just open it up.
Thank you so much, Sid. That's the end of the first part of this discussion, and we're going to move on to a video now from Diana.
Unless you have been living under a rock for the last 2 months, you would have noticed, sensed, and seen the depth of change that is coming our way. As school leaders, you know, because you are the architects of social change in your schools, in your community, and therefore across this nation. And we know now that this is the moment. And we are going to seize that. And it will take courageous leaders of all our schools, FE colleges, universities, every institution which considers itself a place of learning, that this is the time for change. And for change to be sustainable within our systems, there are pillars that must be present. And let me give you 2 of them that are very tangible, easy. You know this, but we need to do them. The first is leaders. Listening, depth of listening is crucial now. Not listening to hear, not listening to reply, but listening to understand. Where you create forums for genuine dialogue and to listen. Listen to those who are hurting, those who have been hurt, those who may be the perpetrators of hurt. Once you listen and you really hear, you develop an understanding of all perspectives around you, then you can begin to engineer constructs that will hold up change. Let me say this, you cannot see the back of your head. You cannot see your own mistakes. You don't proofread your own work. You need experts, allies who have your best interests at heart to come alongside you, alongside your organization, and help you with this change. Don't be afraid to call upon people who will help you navigate these waters. I always teach this. It's my favorite tool because it helps leaders to implement change in a way that will be sustainable, in a way where it will overwhelm the workforce, overwhelm your teams, and it will make them part of the change in a way they can buy into it and stay and find their place within it. It's a simple tool, and if you know me, you'll know this. It's MIC. M-I-C. So in all of this, what are we going to maintain in our schools that we do really well? Each leader asking themselves and their school communities, what shall we keep? What shall we maintain? It works. What shall we maintain? But actually we need to improve it. I for improve. We'll keep doing it. We'll keep saying it, but we will improve it. And then C for change. Okay, that cannot stay. That cannot remain. That needs to change. When you MIC, M-I-C, it gives your school, your community a framework to build and engineer change in a way where change will stay. Whether you are leading next year, in the next 10 years, change will stay because the culture changes. And if culture is how we behave, then let us begin to change how we behave, how we think, how we treat each other, how we feel, what we think is important, how we do things. I'm excited because now is the season for great social change. Things will never be the same again. There is no normal going back to where we were. We go on, we go forward, and we go together. Be courageous. Let's do this.
And that's a great video from Diana there, and talking about being courageous. We have courageous leaders on this panel call, and quite a lot of the questions that have been throughout this session have been about how you get a diverse senior leadership team, how important that is, how we protect Black teachers within the system, especially when they're speaking out. And we also had one questioner say, how do we attract diverse talent in predominantly white areas? So I was going to throw that open to Gwyneth first.
Okay. All right. So I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. So for me, first of all, I have to say, Diana, you were always an inspiration to me, and I love what you said there. And that MIC changed my leadership team, actually, because she was my leadership coach, and going through that process. And what it does, one of the ways that you move away from making judgments about what someone looks like and saying, I have to have a diverse leader, because we need to be really careful here. What we don't want to do is promote ideas about positive discrimination, because that's just another offense. So the idea is about, when I did that MIC, what I looked at, I was able to then just really look strategically and clinically at what it is I needed to improve in my leadership team. What skills do I need? And so once I started to look at that, I wasn't looking at what someone looks like. I was looking at what talent, what richness can they bring? But because my glaze is not fogged over, I see everybody. And the important thing I was talking about there in the video is about, when you are a Black leader, it's very difficult to make that next move, because you have to be flawless. And that is not true. Leaders don't need to be flawless. And so what you need to do is see the potential in everybody and just see people. It's hard to explain, because what has to happen is, like Diana said, we have to make a move now that we can never go back on. And you have to see people, look at people's background. What experience and expertise do they really bring to your team? I have a diverse team. I also have quite a young team, not myself, but members. But because it didn't matter about their age, what mattered was, what expertise, what talent do they bring to my school so that I can make a difference to the young people that I serve? And that's really, really important. So to build a diverse team, don't sit down there and start doing a quota of, well, I better get a couple of Black leaders in here and a couple of Asian leaders. Actually, what you need to do is open your eyes and look at the talent around you, and stop being restricted by your notions of what someone's limitations are on their ethnicity. And I hope that makes sense.
That does. Does anybody else want to come in on those points?
I think Diana's got her hand up.
Diana?
Hi, afternoon, everybody. This is amazing. Well done. Sophie, all the guys who put their hand to put this together, I salute you. One of the things that I learned is that if you see diversity as a complication, you're going to be in trouble with this. Diversity in leadership is a strategic advantage to your organization. I'll say it again, because that is so important. Diversity in leadership is your strategic advantage. And when you begin to change your mind, governors of schools who make appointments for head teachers, trust leaders who make appointments for head teachers, when you change your lens to see that Black people, Asian people, women, men, and you have a diverse leadership team at all levels, you bring upon yourself such advantage, because they bring additionality, they bring richness, they bring experience from all corners of the earth. Your leadership team is at such a strategic advantage that success can come and come and come and come, because you are surrounding yourself with advantage. You are taking away that echo chamber of my voice, which is replicated in the voice of other people, because we're all the same, we look the same, we think the same, we've had the same experience. So you take away the echo chamber and the group think, you widen your team's advantage, and you bring a platform of success that you can build upon for your leadership and for your school or your organization. That's true for schools, for organizations worldwide. But it takes courage to think like that, because normally, unfortunately, diversity is seen as something to tick. We're talking about, Gwyneth just mentioned positive discrimination. You've got to have, so in our minds, so many men. Oh, there's too many men. Oh, there's too many white men. Oh God, we've got a black female head teacher. Right, that box is well ticked. It's not about that. It's about, can we open our minds to see the strategic advantage that comes by being openly, genuinely, normally diverse, rather than exceptionally diverse. I would encourage, and that's why I said in my speech that you cannot see your own mistakes. I can't see my mistakes. I can't see my own biases because I live in them. And I learned this about strategic advantage in diversity by studying, because I teach in MA, and by studying the material I'm teaching my students. So I had to get an expert for a piece of paper and then talk to other people so I could see my own biases, my own mistakes, and move myself forward. I'd encourage CEOs, governors, politicians, everyone, open your minds to these ways of thinking. They've always been there, but we didn't really have avenues to think about them until we were forced to. Now, I'm glad that we are all forced to look at this and work together on these agendas.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think there's been a number of questions around how schools can change individually, but also how we can tackle this nationally and tackle the changes that are needed at a national curriculum level. And politics and advocacy is one of those ways, parents, lobbying, those are actions that can be taken away, but they take a long time. So I was just wondering if there are anybody on the panel that want to pick up those points.
Alison's got her hand up.
Okay, Alison, and Penny as well.
Oh,
okay,
sorry,
good
Penny.
afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity to be part of the panel. I don't know whether you remember when we had the red cards for kicking out racism, and schools were flooded with amazing resources. In fact, most schools probably still have them. That was an amazing opportunity to get something right in terms of introducing an anti-racist ethos into schools. Unfortunately, the strategic work wasn't done beforehand, and there was no thinking into how you take communities with you so that anti-racism can become the normal in every school. So before schools do the appointments of do the appointments to have a diverse staff, before you start thinking about what the curriculum is going to look like and all of the other add-ons that will come from the schools which are enriched with an anti-racist ethos, the groundwork has to be done. And first, this has to start from school leaders at the highest level. They need to understand what anti-racism means. And what I'm seeing at the minute is everybody's getting on and doing. Everybody's doing. Nobody's thinking. And that worries me enormously, because if we don't start doing the thinking first and the onboarding and the nurturing the curriculum so that parents, staff, pupils understand what anti-racism means and why they need to be anti-racist, then all of the changes that we make will just become a phase for today. So I think, people are sort of saying to me, oh, can you send me a list of books? Yeah, by all means, send a list of books. It was really interesting. Someone then commented saying, oh, don't take our whiteness away. Nobody's saying get rid of the white books. Nobody's saying replace the white books. We're saying, by all means, resource alongside so that the school becomes more enriched. But before any of that makes any sense to anyone, you've got to take your team with you. And that has to come from leaders who are willing to be vulnerable, who are willing to grow with their staff, who want to lead their staff rather than direct their staff, and that's going to take time. So anyone who's come up with their anti-racist statement in the last week, I'm sorry, it's a tiny beginning, but that doesn't make your institution anti-racist. All you've got at the moment is a set of words on a piece of paper. And now what you've got to start doing is to think very strategically on, about what that means. What does it look like? If you're going to go for a diverse staff, if you want to have greater representation, then it cannot just be, let's recruit some Black teachers, let's have the occasional black teacher in there, because then we're going to be fine. You actually have to go much deeper. So if we are anti-racist and we're going to have a diverse staff, then how is it going to look in our staff? How are we going to make them feel properly included? How are we going to deal with the racism they're going to feel? How are we going to make sure they don't feel othered? All of those questions need to happen before you do any doing.
Absolutely spot on, Alison. I think the conversation so far has been about what can we do to change in schools, but actually it's also bringing the community along with us as well. Otherwise it just stops and starts at a school gate. Penny had her hand up on this point.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to be said by taking a top-down and bottom-up approach. And I think some of the things that we're trying to do in the BAMED network is to try to make it kind of irresistible and a no-brainer. So Diana talked about, you know, how having a diverse team makes you a better team. And the McKinsey report shows really clearly why diversity matters. So sometimes pushing some research that says why it makes teams better can help. I think also we need to look at Ofsted. How can a school be rated as good if it's not teaching a curriculum that serves all of the population and tells the whole truth about our history, about our literature, and so on and so forth? So that's a quick win. If schools can't be judged as good unless they are teaching a really, well, Ofsted refers to a broad and balanced curriculum, but they don't state, you know, what that needs to include. They reference cultural capital, but that is taken as a very particular culture and excludes, you know, cultures that aren't seen as part of the desired culture. How can a school be good if the team isn't diverse? Because if you look at that McKinsey research, it says you will be performing better, making better decisions, and be financially more stable if you have diverse voices around the table. And then I think also how multi-academy trusts and whole local authorities can tackle this. So Haringey Education Partnership has done a whole piece of work around it started with BAME achievement, but quickly spiraled out to, well, children from all backgrounds can't succeed unless we have diversity running through the entirety of our school system. And the first thing that Haringey did was to sign up all head teachers to do an audit on their schools and to write into their school improvement plan how they're going to take steps to improve that. And the school improvement advisors hold schools to account, and everyone has signed up. So I'm a governor and chair of governors in Haringey, and we've all signed up to that, and we all are holding each other and ourselves to account. I think unless we make a statement that we're going to do something and hold ourselves to account and report on that, we're not going to get anywhere. And then the last thing I would say is about organizations like Teach First and initial teacher training. We are growing a generation of teachers who have no idea how society works, that we're you know, talking about groups of children that are disadvantaged, but we haven't tackled where that disadvantage comes from and how we are creating it, perpetuating it and upholding it through being in the education system and being teachers. So I think we need to also start by educating not only our children, but the people who are going to be standing in front of children, because they've missed that. They've gone through our education system and missed a whole chunk of knowledge that doesn't occur to them.
Thank you, Penny. Before I go to Gwyneth on this as well, there's a very specific question in the chat that I actually think is really important to address. Somebody's asked if there's any good resources or if anybody has any information on how to teach Black Lives Matter and racism to children with complex additional needs. If there are any resources or anybody knows any, could they pop that up in the chat, because that question's been up there for quite a while. Gwyneth?
I can't answer that question, but
a specific question.
Information, right? Okay, I'm going to come back, and if I do find some information relating to that question, then obviously we will share that. The reason why, the thing is, we talked about the fact that this is a really complex issue and a complex conversation, and it needs to be the start, because there are many more conversations to be had. There's a deep conversation about how we are termed and defined, and actually who owns the voice of what it is that we need to discuss. So there's a lot of things that have moved before. And one of the things about, we talked about anti-racism and people understanding it. I have never seen in my entire lifetime the movement that, after the sad and tragic loss of George Floyd, that led to Black Lives Matter, I have never seen so many people from every single background demonstrate, holding up placards the world over about Black Lives Matter, and actually out there and recognizing George Floyd as an individual. We are having this conversation because we have moved a long way. So the conversation starting point is, we need to move beyond policy and tick boxing and saying, yeah, we've got this and we've got that, and we just need to go dive in now and make the change, because we are a long way away from where we were and where our starting points were before. The curriculum is, Sheila mentioned it a number of times, that the curriculum actually does leave room to teach more diversity. We just don't exploit that as we should do, and we don't teach the curriculum in that effective way. What we do need to do is, there needs to be conversations up at DFE level and at ministerial level in terms of what the national curriculum looks like. Why? And like I said, you need to ask those tough questions about why has certain history been omitted from the curriculum and not taught, and what are the consequences of that omission. That's a different conversation. But there are things that people can do, and I forgive me, I cannot remember the name of the person who spoke about the old school teacher of citizenship, when he talked about, and what he talked about is absolutely accurate. You need to teach about cultural diversity in a different way, right? We don't need any more policies, we are policied out. And one of the things with the policy about, anti-racism and about equality, et cetera, is that it just fulfills an obligation, but it has no action. And the point that we're at is an action. And the Black Lives Matter, or mattering, agenda and movement has now given us rise to this voice, to the voice that we are expressing now. And this is the voice that we need to jump on. I don't want to be sitting here talking about, I support BAME, you do a fantastic job in promoting and giving rise to leaders from minority groups who felt like they don't have a voice, right? We have a voice now, and let us use it. Let's continue that fantastic work that you do, and let's not over egg it. Let's just have a conversation. I'm happy. I'm going to host a roundtable event where we talk about the curriculum and we put real actions in, not formulated tick sheet that everybody has to adhere to, because then you get a conversation about, well, why are we adhering to that? Forget all of that. We're beyond that. Let us just get to be brave. Get out there and start teaching the curriculum. One of the things, though, my last point, why I'm saying that the DFE has to be at that level and Ofqual needs to be involved, is because it's all good and well saying that the curriculum allows us to do it, but when you look at examinations, it doesn't. When I was at university, I studied Caribbean studies, and I also studied women's studies. And when I studied women's studies, we'd have 12-week units. The first 11 weeks were women and media, women and this. Week 12, the essay had to be in week 11, but week 12 was always black women and something else. So I had nothing to do with the examination. It was ridiculous. I caused a lot of trouble at the time because that's what I do. But the fact is, we had those debates. But the fact is, if you're going to have an examination process, which we have to prepare our pupils for which we are judged for, and that exam doesn't question those things. That's why we need to have the conversations up high. Let's do it through citizenship. Let's do it mainly at Key Stage 4, 3. But I know people are going to be saying at Key Stage 4, they've got to pass an exam, and the exam is not diverse. And that's why it needs to change.
Thanks, Gwyneth. I'm reminded of a phrase, well-behaved women seldom make history. I wanted to come to you, Diana, if I could. There's a question that's come up repeatedly about how schools can actually attract and encourage people to apply for jobs in their area?
Wow. Let me give you an example. Somebody contacted me on LinkedIn last week, and they said that they want to go for a headship that is in a more rural area than they're used to, but they really want to apply for this. They're currently ahead. They want to move out of the urban London setting and move into another place. Do you think I should go for it? And I said to you, what's stopping you? And these are what said, I'm not sure if I'm wasting my time, just putting my application in. I'm not sure if the people who are on the panel are going to recognize what I bring. So I said, okay, let's have a conversation. As I spoke to him, I gave him some advice. But when I got to thinking about that, if I am CEO or somebody in a position where I'm doing the hiring, you make your advert explicit as to the talent I am looking for. And I'm looking for that in any person who has this talent, please apply. If application is a way off for you, come and look round my school and meet me or meet our organisation. You make it easy for anyone, for everyone who qualifies in terms of the criteria that you want to apply. And again, that's why I say to people, you don't see the mistakes on the back of your head. So when I read some of the adverts in our TES, which is the paper or the organisation where lots of jobs are advertised for teaching, we wanted a dynamic, outstanding, innovative, and every adjective under the sun person to do X, Y, Z. And what you're describing is somebody that can walk on water rather than somebody who can do the job that you want them to do. Again, that's a mistake you wouldn't see because it's the back of your head. You've always done it that way. You've always said your job description is written like that. You're not writing for the person that you're looking for. You're writing to fulfill your lovely recruitment pack. You need someone to come alongside you and say, okay, I wouldn't apply for that because you've put me off with your language, not because I don't feel I'm qualified. And it takes courage. And I do courage, this is what I do, so I can't help but use that word, so I will use it again. Because we have to change as leaders these destructive habits. And it's a habit. Recruitment is a habit. There's a form that I fill, my PA will sign it off, it goes to the press, out it goes. There are habits and procedures that are built up just the way schools run that make it easy for me to do the recruitment, but actually it takes away my thinking about this process. So when we start to have the courage to break those habits, then recruitment becomes an advantage. This is what I'm looking for. Can you do data? If you can, come to my school and have a look around. That's basically because what I want is a data manager. I don't want all the other adjectives add gloss and fluff. What do I want? Somebody who can teach. Somebody who can teach teachers how to teach. Is that you? Give me a ring. So it's about having that honesty to say, this is what I want. I need it and I need it now. Come and have a look around my school and get away from the habits that we've formed in recruitment, for example. You need someone to come alongside you. I'm very much into having allies. Because if you try and do this on your own, what are you doing? Working in a silo. Working in your group think tank, working in your echo chamber, and not much can change because you think you're all right. Yeah? You think you're doing well because we don't look at ourselves through a critical lens. We look at ourselves with a lovely rose-colored, fabulous lens because I think I'm fabulous. Does that help? Whoever asked the question, I hope that helps.
That really helps. Thank you, Diana. I just want to come to Rahana and Stephen now to see if they want to pick up on any of the points that have been raised. Rahana, I'm going to come to you first, and that's any of the points that were raised in the first or the second panel, really.
Thank you, actually, Arv and others who have organised this. I found it really educational, but actually really emotive from a personal point of view. And I'm going to begin this piece from me, coming from a place of real humility, because I am clearly not Black. And my experience as an ethnic minority in Britain is very distinct and different. And I think those points have been raised about you know, about the way that we talk about different communities and the real distinct nature of our, you know, our experiences here. I am really excited about a discussion about diverse curriculums, but I think it's important that we don't miss the point that Alison made earlier, and talking about who is delivering the curriculum. And now I've got a great deal of time and respect for teachers, but I think we've really got to honestly ask ourselves, how well equipped are our school leaders, our heads of departments, our teachers, our teaching assistants? How well equipped are we to talk about racism within our schools? Somebody made the really important point of facilitating those conversations with young people. How do we do that when we don't have the skills to understand it ourselves? Because racism is a complex thing and it impacts different communities in different ways. Many young people that I talk to will often internalize racist narratives, and that's something else as an adult that we've got to help them detangle themselves from. So the thing that comes before all of this is, how do we upskill everybody to ensure that we are equipped to take this discussion forward? And it's not about this webinar or a one-off piece of training. This is a roots up approach, that if we acknowledge today that the education in Britain and the way that we deliver it and the curriculum is systemically racist, it requires a systemic approach in dismantling and taking that apart again. And that again requires some real bravery and introspection from all of us. And I direct that probably more strongly to white leaders listening, because it is not the responsibility of Black and brown people to do this work for you. And all too often, what we see in discussions around anti-racism are that we will, you know, bring in people of color to talk about this, that, you know, to educate others about this, often, and it's important to say, without paying them to do it, that we should be grateful to be in the room. And so again, school leaders, if we think this is important, we need to put our money where our mouths are and really invest in this, because this is not an add-on. This is, you know, about ultimately our young people. The thing that hasn't been mentioned so far is safeguarding. And I am perpetually dismayed at the lack of focus on racism as a safeguarding issue and the trauma that racism presents to its young people. And that trauma has long-term impacts and implications for them in the way that, you know, there's so much data out there about people of color and, you know, young people of color and their aspirations. And there's so much that we know from personal experiences and again from data of how much that is diminished over the years due to our experiences of racism, and how we end up often limiting ourselves because of this. So I think in terms of safeguarding, you know, it's a really important discussion that we've got to start having. There's some great research. My friend Janine Davies does some really important work around how often we miss children of color, and particularly Black girls, within safeguarding issues because we don't see them as victims. If we see young Black boys as a safeguarding issue, it's often because we criminalize them. If we see young Muslim girls in safeguarding contexts, we're talking about arranged marriages and we're talking about forced marriages and FGM, but we don't talk about racism and the impact that that has on them. So if we are to truly tackle this issue, we've got to have a really broad discussion, nuts and bolts, about how this impacts in our schools. And it requires a lot of work beforehand, before we can even start, I think, delivering a curriculum, because we need to make sure that the people who deliver this are equipped to do so.
Thank you, Rahana. And I'm just going to come to Stephen. I know that people have got their hands up, but I think our time is very short now. So I'm going to make Stephen the last speaker.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, for kind of the invitation. It's a privilege to be able to talk to everybody. And I'm, like to take Gwyneth's kind of opening speech and kind of just replay that and replay that and replay that, because I think there are those challenging conversations. It was a direct challenge to me as a white male leader in an educational leadership role. And it's something that I'm going to have to, I think Alana raised this in previous conversations, get comfortable with being uncomfortable about having the conversations and having a view. And do more than just kind of think about it. Yes, I agree with Alison, there's thinking to do, but thinking without action doesn't really lead us anywhere. And so I'm with Diana on kind of having the opportunity to have that depth of discussion, to listen, to understand, and actually to build something that isn't, back to the point that you made, this isn't kind of a flash in the pan, a temporary moment, a fashion. This is something that we need to build in. And as an academy trust with 10% of my children from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, 3% of my staff, I want to, in answer to the question, how do we recruit, is to create that culture, as Diana says, where they feel they are valued, they're comfortable, to have voices, and those voices are valued and heard. And I don't think we do enough in that. To do that, I have to use what I probably wouldn't have described as a child as my white privilege, but my privilege to be able to raise those voices and to amplify those voices. And I listened to a lot about Alana. Alana was talking with Patrick Otley O'Connor about how you do that. And that's really kind of had some resonance with me about, what part I can play. And so I've been reading the work of Professor Paul Miller, who's got a really good paper on kind of what leaders and governors can do. And that's really a starting point for me as to what we do in our trust and with our school leaders, where actually, there's a real need to address this openly and have a discussion that helps to move this agenda forward. So it's been a privilege to have the last word on this, but also to have listened, hopefully with intelligence and with wisdom, to the people today to be able to do something about it.
Thank you so much, Stephen. You were so succinct. We have time and the pressure's off from you being the last speaker. Anne, I was going to come to you. I saw that your hand was up.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much. Really just touching on what maybe 4 or 5 of the panel have said so far. If we're going to make this more than just a moment in time and do this as a process of continual change, then we can't avoid talking about systemic change. And that means really there needs to be a cross-party approach to this, a commitment across parties over the longer term. And I think what we found in the past is that successive governments have had motions where certain things are prioritized and then they simply drop off the agenda. If we had a cross-party approach, then there would be a commitment in the longer term. And what does that systemic change look like? Well, obviously then there's change across the teacher training, there's looking at the scope of leadership at MAT level. We've talked a lot about leadership at school level, and I'm glad that Stephen's indicated what he himself will do with his own multi-academy trust post this event. But I think certainly gathering together some of the action points from today would be a really good starting point, not only for leaders in education, but for the system to simply say, are we doing enough? Is this going to be, come September, when all the schools open up again, we know the priorities are going to change because of the last few months and what has taken place. This cannot drop off the agenda, and we need to be considering actions as how we keep this dialogue going, how we keep it as sustainable change, but how we hold people to account and measure that change.
Thank you, Anne. I think that's a really good challenge for politicians to be left with, to find cross-party agreement. I think on education, it is always going to be difficult to say that possibly my views on the national curriculum will be very different to, say, Michael Gove's or Gavin Williamson's. But I think on this issue specifically, I would hope that there is enough goodwill cross-party to see the changes that are necessary and that they're delivered and funded as well. I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this webinar. I've learned a huge amount, and also that I'm keen that this doesn't just stop here. I want to take this recording and I want to share it with the shadow education team within the Labour Party, and I want to see this as best practice, because this is something that should be happening and should be happening continuously, because as Stephen said, we have to have the uncomfortable conversations sometimes, and the more we have them, the less uncomfortable they'll be. So thank you very, very much. I'm going to hand you over to Arv now, and I also want to say thank you to everybody that's put questions in the Q&A. I know that there's, I think, 70, but there's been well over 100 questions that have been asked, and we haven't been able to get around to all of them, and I apologise, but hopefully the panellists have managed to give you as much of their expertise and answers as possible. So thank you very much, and Arv, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to, first of all, thank you, Sarah, for chairing this. I don't know if I could have done what you've just done there over the two panels and negotiate just on the technical side of it. So thank you for the time and effort that you've set aside to be part of this. It's really important. And also to the people that are on the panels. You know, I know how precious time is, but also how important this issue is, and we really value, as I think everybody that's attended today and that will watch this after today, really appreciate your input in this initial session that we've had, and it's part of a journey, which is what I've said before. Those of you that know me and the work that I've started in terms of looking at a systemic change within our structures in education, and the discussion is far greater than what we've had today, and it needs to go on for much longer than we've had today, and we need to have this discussion and keep it going and turn it into action. I will be sharing quite a lot online regarding places that you can go as leaders, and I would put this challenge out to you in terms of leaders that are listening in today, is that if you are serious about making systemic change within your organization, whether you're a CEO or a MAT, or a head teacher within a school, you do have control over certain aspects of what you do. There are things I do understand that you don't, but there is a lot that you do have control over. Sandra Kerr at Race at Work has done a lot of work in terms of the Race at Work Charter. So if you're thinking, I don't know where to start, there's 5 really good points to start with as an organisation. I'll share those out with you later. There is not one school in the UK that has signed to the Race at Work Charter, and there are over 300 to 400 organisations from the FTSE 100 all the way down that have been signatories to this, which are actionable points on how you can actually change the landscapes in your school. We do need to make this change. We do need to rethink how we're going to move forward. And we do have this fantastic opportunity to create a new normal as we move forward. But we must keep our eyes on the ball and not let this drift off the agenda as things have done in the past. So big thank you to every single person that's attended today, every single person that's contributed in the panel, whether you've spoken at length or a little, or actually just being present today. To be fair, putting your face up there today has been so important, and let's get active however you do with your networks to make sure that we share what we've done today, but also more importantly to continue this discussion and turn it into action. So without further ado, I think I am going to sign off. We are now running a good nearly 10 minutes over our session. I am going to sign off today. This is me, Arv Cowshaw, with a special edition of #LDEduChat, which is leadership development and education. And we're looking at Black Lives Matters and anti-racism, and what and how that's a responsibility for our whole school community. Thank you so much, and I look to see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.